assumed church doctrine was true, but there were things they looked at, they used reason, and there's some really good parts to this too, if you will. Here's, because we don't do this today, it's a lost art. In a medieval university, there were two types of lessons. And I don't know the Latin word, but there was one for what we call a lecture, where a professor, teacher, would expound upon something. And no questions asked, you just take notes. Then they had a lesson that you would call debate, where an idea was brought up and the opposite idea was brought up. And someone would present one view and someone would present the other view. And you were supposed to take these opposing views and come to a synthesis. Now, let me ask you about news programs today. Do newscasters do this today?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. Often they only present what?
One side.
One view. And you got to listen to a different news station to get the what?
Other view.
The other view. So, you know, we think these dumb medieval people didn't know anything. They knew enough to look at both sides of something. And so something's true, it should be able to stand up to the opposition. So they had thorough debates of things. Some bringing out one point of view, some bringing another point of view, and then Thomas believed they could come to a synthesis between the two views. I don't know if that's always true, but that was his philosophy. And based on that kind of thinking, universities were founded in Europe. Now we can have honest debate on an issue. There are issues in this country, especially in our public school system, you cannot debate. You go into a biology class and say, I want to present the view of creation. Oh, that's in the Bible. There's no science for that. You can't talk about that. It's not in the textbook. I say, liar, liar, pants on fire. There is scientific evidence for it, but you're not allowed to present it. Just one side. Okay? Or I've read some articles on the topic of global warming or climate instability. He said, the writer said, neither side will be objective. They're so like polarized over this thing, they won't listen to each other. Nobody debates it honestly. So what he's saying is, we've lost something that in the medieval period they knew how to do. Now this has meaning to me because I teach in a classical Christian school, and we use this method. When we got to the Arians, remember the Arians who believed that Jesus was, you know, not quite deity, something below, not God? Half the class had to become Arians and present the Arian view. The other had to present the Trinitarian view and have a debate with each other. Where do we get that from? St. Thomas, medieval period. I don't have a problem with the opposition as long as you're able to present the truth. The truth stands fine on its own if you hear both sides. And that is not what's going on in the world today. Okay? If I listen to something on CBS, I've got to go listen to Fox to find out the other side of the story. Which is sometimes what I do. Or some other news sources. You have to look at both. You know, sometimes, you know, someone plays the devil's advocate, we got them. But then listen to the truth. And what really happens, there's an expression, the lie makes itself around the world before the truth puts its boots on. And this is true many times. Someone tells us something, it is not true, it is broadcast, everybody hears about it, and somebody, you know, just, wait a minute, how about this, how about that? Whoa! Nobody's listening for the other side to come out. But so, you know, this is something my students are actually taught to debate issues. Study each side carefully and debate them. That's a medieval idea. It's a great idea. And it should go on in a newscast. Those liberal stations should bring up a conservative and let them show both sides. Go at it, guys. They do that sometimes, but not often. The evening news, forget it. You're going to get one side. Okay? So anyways, this is just something that they had on us, if you will, that we can learn from. Anyways, so because these universities, studying at them were often monks, and everyone had a kind of a universal Christian view and outlook. It strengthened the papacy. All right? It never challenged it. They didn't deal with those issues. Well, that's what it's. Now, let's go on here. Okay. Also, monastic reforms, and the reforms, we talked about them. No simony. Remember simony? Simony is when you buy a church office. When the church got corrupt, people were buying church offices. You want to be the archbishop? Pay the price. Become the archbishop. Okay? And we said in the day of Christ, the high priest, simony, was practiced. The highest bidder became the high priest each year. And with it, tremendous amount of power, political power, and money involved. And this is why Jesus did not get along with the religious authorities of his day. They bought the position. They didn't merit it at all. It wasn't God-given. It was money. You know, there's two golden rules in the world. Do unto others as you have them do unto you. The other golden rules, he who has the most gold rules. And those two rules are in opposition to each other. Yes. So in the day of Christ, he who had the most gold ruled. And Jesus taught a very different golden rule. Those two powers still fight each other today in our government, even sometimes in our churches. All right? So, we got that going on. Now, let me move on from here. Zealous monks, and when the monks cleaned up their act, simony was banned. Then nepotism. Remember nepotism? You give the jobs to all your friends and relatives. That's nepotism. Okay? So if you get rid of simony, you can't buy the office. You get rid of nepotism, you can't give the offices to your relatives. And then the third one, all the monks and the priests had to be celibate. You've eliminated a lot of problems. If you will, you're not doing those things anymore for money or power. You have to do them for real religious conviction. And this went on, and the monasteries with monks under this reform platform were absolutely zealous and loyal to the Pope. So that strengthened the papacy. Now, let's go on from there. Let's see. Yes, Gregory VII and Innocent III. I don't think he was too innocent when we see what he did, but that's his name. That's always an irony, Innocent III. He sent armies against his opponents. Doesn't sound too innocent to me, but he actually did. Okay, they dominate the history of medieval papacy. Okay, and this came from the textbook I read when I was in school. That's where the notes are coming from. A book called Christianity Through the Centuries. It's a good textbook. I had given it away when I left the U.S. and it got back to my hands the other day, or a few weeks ago, and I've been using it since. Both men were unwilling to accept the idea that God had given the Pope and the temporal ruler coordinate sovereignty over the souls and bodies of people. The Pope would not accept the idea that he derived his control over the souls of men and women from the temporal ruler. Okay? Meaning, he said, my authority does not come from that king, it comes from God, and so he believed that he had authority over the temporal ruler. Up until, and I think actually really right, we're talking about Gregory the Great, 400 AD, the idea is that the Pope and the temporal ruler shared authority. The Pope had spiritual authority, and the ruler had civil authority. And they were to share that authority. That was the idea. But by 1000 AD, the idea is the Pope, supreme ruler, really he's the supreme ruler of the world. That's what they believe, that's what they preach, and for a short season, they actually exercise that kind of authority. Like, I'm the ruler of the world, and I will tell you what you're going to do. And if you don't do it, watch out, because I'm going to yield that authority I have. I'll show you how they got people to do what they wanted. So, this is You know, we think about church, we think about, praying, and winning souls, and teaching the Word of God. Does it sound like this at all?
No.
No. They're way out there somewhere, but this is what they were doing. So this is, if you will, a history lesson. I don't even know if you want to call it a church lesson anymore. This is so far from church as we understand it. It's the body of Christ and the unity of us having a heart for the lost together and accepting differences among Christians and doing the work of the ministry. This is a power grab here going on. All right. So, for 20 years, he was in a position to form papal authority, and then he became pope. And I'm not going to go through all the details of that, but some of them I have to do with you here. A little bit about Hildebrand, which will become Gregory VII. A small, ungainly man with a weak voice had all the zeal of the best reformers of the Cluniac monasteries. Remember the monasteries? These monasteries were reformed monasteries based on three things. No nepotism, no simony, and celibacy. And that was part of the reform movement. And so he was zealous, for those things. So, from that time on, celibacy, beginning with Gregory VII, was the pattern of the Roman Catholic Church, and it is to this day. Right? You cannot be a priest unless you are celibate. And people argued about it, and they'll argue about it until the Lord comes. The Catholic Church has never been on it. And it's been debated, all the problems that are with it. And if you will, all the godly men who would not go into the ministry because they wanted to have a wife and a family. They're missing here. So, let's see. How much do I want you really? I'm trying to do this quickly or an overview because all the details are really not important. All right. There's a power structure that's developing in the Middle Ages that I was not aware of. I better read this to you. About the beginning of the 4th century, certain churches in Rome and its environs had been designated as exclusive sites for baptism. Isn't this interesting? You can only baptize in these churches, giving the bishops of those churches, as you remember, most of the church, all of the church, if you will, believed in salvation through water baptism, beginning with the teaching of Ambrose we talked about. He didn't think he was saved until he was water baptized. So the person who has authority to baptize has authority to save you. If you're not baptized, then you're not saved, you're going to hell. And medieval people believe this. So baptism, one of the sacraments, really became a club of the church, if you will, or a way the church could control people's lives, who they would baptize, who they would not, who could do the baptizing. All right? So, and what we teach is, Peter said baptism saves you, but he says it's not the washing the filth from the flesh, but an appeal to God of a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So what Peter was saying is, what baptism represents saves you. Faith in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The actual washing in the water does not save you. But Jesus' faith in his death and resurrection does. The church lost that message to their demise. And now we've got, you could only baptize in these churches and not these other churches. Giving some bishops more authority and power than others. There's a power structure developing here. We talk about control freaks. It's part of human nature. We're seeing it in the church. So, the division of Rome into districts for works of charity had been made somewhat earlier, and the priests of these areas were known as cardinal deacons, meaning certain bishops were called cardinals, and they could distribute goods to the poor. Obviously, this again gives them more power and authority. All right? Bishops near Rome were known as cardinal bishops. These men were the nucleus of what was to become the College of Cardinals. Now, just a little history here, instead of reading it all. Gregory the Great and the other bishops of Rome before him were elected by the populace. The people actually decided who was going to be the Pope, and then they'd get approval, usually from the emperor or from some other church authority. But there are places where people, gathered and scared in crowds and screamed and yelled, Gregory, Gregory, we want Gregory, Gregory. Everybody's okay, we'll give you Gregory. The Pope was actually decided, the Bishop of Rome, by the populace, popular vote. That changes with what we call the College of Cardinals, which is how it's done today. Meaning bishops or archbishops, cardinals today, when we call them cardinals, from all over the world gather together and they vote on who's going to be the next pope. That began in this period. I don't have the exact year, but after 1054, they began to form what we would call the College of Cardinals. If you will, the Christian on the street no longer has a say anymore who's going to be his bishop. This increased the power of papacy. The cardinals are deciding this thing, and the layman is left out of it. Right? Now, let's go locally. At some point, if the Lord tarries, at some point, Pastor Moore will not be the pastor here anymore. How are you going to pick a new pastor? This is a question every local church has to deal with. Okay? And actually, the way our church government is set up, the new pastor will be decided by the elders. So what will the elders do? They will poll the people and see if we have a consensus in this. And sometimes there's some arguments and disagreements about it. But you have to decide who's going to be the next pastor, the next bishop, the next cardinal. This is something religious institutions have to do. So you have to resolve it one way or another. Some churches just do vote by the people. You get the most votes, you're the pastor. Others, it's the elders. Others, it's a combination. You have to somehow do this. And I don't know that one form is perfect or imperfect. But this is, the two different ways of deciding the next leader changed here. From the populace to the bishops or cardinals deciding in the College of Cardinals. So that happened. That was one of those things that went on. And that, by the way, that's better than simony, meaning someone who can put up the most money becomes the next pope. Or someone who has a political pull, getting their man in, nepotism kind of thing. This is a better system. But it went on. Now, there's a structure to this thing. And by the way, people don't pay much attention to a church's government until you have a decision like that. Oh, we need a new pastor. How do we decide this? Then people pick up that constitution and say, well, how do we do this? We've never done this before. This hasn't been done in 20 years. How does this work again? And you see the rules you've agreed to work on, to live by. So anyways, I know you want the Lord to come first. That's a good idea. Keep Pastor Moore in there. Yeah, he's pastor till the rapture. That's not a good idea. We can kid about it, but all right. Now, then he can keep skiing until the rapture. He'll be very happy. All right. So, I mentioned here, Hildebrand at one point was put in charge of the finances, which gave him quite a bit of power. But let's go on to what he actually did when he became, you know what, take a break. We'll talk about what he did when he actually became the emperor. Or not, I shouldn't say emperor, that's wrong. He's acting like the emperor, but really becoming the what? The Pope. And I'm using them interchangeably because the Pope had all the power of an emperor. He really did.